Good morning. I'm David Burns, the Chairman of the English Business Council. I'd like to introduce this morning Nickie Aiken, the Conservative MP for the cities of London and Westminster. Nickie, thank you for joining us today.
Morning, David. Lovely to be with you.
Just a quickie, can you give us a short bio and why you chose politics?
Well, I have been in the Conservative Party for over 30 years, and I began at university when I was at Exeter University in the southwest of England, and met a group of people who persuaded me to join the Conservative Party, and took it from there. Really went back to Wales, where I'm from, and continued my politics there locally. And then moved to London and decided in 2006 to stand for Westminster City Council. I had a baby, Georgia, who was about 2 years old then, and I wanted to show her that women could succeed in public life, that they could make a real difference. So I became a councillor 2006, and then 2010, the then leader put me in his cabinet as the lead member for children's services. Then I got the added portfolio of community protection, which allowed me then to look at the gangs issue, the growing gangs issue we had in Westminster, and then looked at domestic abuse and that type of issue that was causing real issues for families across the borough. And then in 2016, I became the group leader of the Conservative Party in Westminster and the leader of the council, and did that very happily for about 3 or 4 years, and then stood for Parliament in December and got elected. And since then, I was happily going along, learning the ropes as a local MP. And then this thing called COVID-19 decided to appear, and it's been a very, very different time. Obviously, all MPs spent at least 10 weeks at home.
Yes, yes, we'll come on to that in a second. I understand that you're doing a lot of charity work in your constituency, and I have to say, as an outsider, I would have thought Westminster was quite affluent, but I'm sure there are things. What is it that you're doing, and who are you doing it for? Well,
that is the interesting concept that people have of Westminster and the City of London, is that it's affluent. And yes, Westminster is home to Mayfair, the West End, Belgravia, Knightsbridge, but it's also home to places like Church Street. Now, that's not in my constituency, it's in Westminster North, but it's part of the borough of Westminster. It's one of the poorest areas in the country. In the City of London, obviously, it's affluent, but there are also social housing where people rent their homes and have lived there for many, many years. So it isn't the usual understanding that it is a rich area. Yes, of course it is. But there are amazing charities in Westminster, particularly around rough sleeping, because Westminster is home to the largest number of rough sleepers in the country because of the geographic nature of being the capital of the capital. It draws more people in because then people can get help, they can beg for money, they can the rough sleepers I speak to say they feel safer on the streets of Westminster because it's so busy.
Yeah.
So there's an awful lot of work going on for rough sleepers, and I work with the Passage, I work with St Mungo's, and others to really understand the reasons why people end up on the streets and try to move them on, basically, and improve their lives.
One of our senior management at the English Business Council works with St Martin's in the Fields. I understand they do some good work in the evenings for the homeless.
Yes, they do. They've got they're outstanding charity. They do the night shelter, and I've been there several times. And they work with Westminster City Council to try and then provide services, because the vast majority of people who are on the streets are usually there because of drug or drink addiction, mental health. And so places like St Martin's in the Field have the services there to really try and turn people's lives around.
Excellent. Can you give us a bit of an explanation on your private members bill? Because a lot of the general public don't understand what a private members bill is and which is the one that you're passionate about.
Well, I tabled my first ever private members bill this week. It's for the regulation of pedicabs in London, pedicabs, rickshaws. There's around about 2,000 in Westminster at the moment, and the vast majority do not adhere to good road sense. They do not regulate their fares. They play very loud music from their rickshaws. There's no checks for the drivers to make sure they're fit to take people around, and their rickshaws are not checked for roadworthiness. So it's not about banning pedicabs, it's about making them safer, because there are people, international visitors in particular, who come and want to enjoy the spectacle that is central London by taking a pedicab, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's also a growing use of pedicabs by companies for deliveries in central London. So that's a green transport. And I'm a huge advocate for improving our air quality. And I do think pedicabs have probably got a part to play in that. So it's about regulating them, making sure that they're safe to use, safe to enjoy, and that they are as green as possible.
I have to say that my wife and I were in London earlier this year, and we always stay at the Victory Services Club, which we've done for years as an ex-serviceman.
Just off Edgware Road?
That's the one, the bottom of Edgware Road, yes. Lovely place. Very, very good value for money. And there were a number of these pedicabs floating around at the time. And I have to say that they were an irritant in so much of their loud music. They don't give way to traffic, so you can get stuck behind them. Some of them look really rickety. So the sooner that they're regulated, the better. And I have to say that I've always been an advocate of bicycles should be licensed anyway. It's a personal...
There's definitely a growing argument for that amongst my constituents.
Yes,
we've seen more and more cycles out, which is great, absolutely brilliant. My family cycle everywhere. My husband cycles to work every day. But it's about safety, and it's about not cycling on the pavement in particular.
Yes, indeed, and not cutting people up and all of the other things. So that full support as far as that the private members bill. How far have you got with that now?
Well, it passed its first reading on Tuesday, just gone, and so it's going to second reading on the 10th of July, which means hopefully, if there's, I basically just call it out in the chamber, and if there's no objections, then it goes through to committee stage, where then we will go through it line by line and try and get it through. So fingers crossed. It's what's not to like about this bill, really. It's not about banning, it's about safety and making them as an enjoyable experience as possible. Yes,
and unfortunately you have some drivers who won't see it that way. They'll just see it as sort of almost being persecuted, and that's unfortunate, but the sooner it's done, the better, in my view. Let's go on to COVID-19, which has affected everybody around the world. It's not just where you are. We've not been able to go out for a long time. The Middle East is, Dubai and Ras Al Khaimah in particular, are very strict on the way that the public gather. And I think it's the right thing to do here. We have 197 different nationalities, all of which don't have the same moral code, if you like. What are you doing in your constituency to combat this terrible pandemic?
Well, obviously we've been in lockdown, which is starting to ease now, and I'm delighted that the vast majority of people adhered to the guidelines. And I worked from home, like all MPs, for about 10 weeks. We went to virtual parliament, so we were speaking, and I took part in debates by Zoom and took part in select committees by Zoom. And then me personally, I've been working with business organisations, property owners, the businesses themselves, the UK hospitality industry, the theatres, bringing everybody together every week for a call where we can discuss how we can work together to basically, we always looked at what the reopening of the economy. We knew that we were in lockdown, there was nothing we could do about it, but it was always about looking to the future. So now that shops starting to open next week, and hopefully bars and restaurants in a couple of weeks' time after that, it's about how we sensibly work together to do that. The issue for us at the moment is the 2 metre rule. We have to keep 2 metres socially distant from each other. Does not work for restaurants and bars. It's about capacity.
Yeah.
They can't open and even not even make a profit, but break even with the number of patrons they can serve. So I've been lobbying to go down to 1 metre. The government's certainly listening. Theatres as well. Theatres are in a dire strait at the moment because even with 1 metre, they've got issues. So working with them to really understand the issues and then going and lobbying government ministers, Bays and the Treasury, the DCMS, to name but a few. And then working with resident associations. And one of the positives that have come out for me during COVID-19 is that I've been able to get to know resident associations, particularly in the City of London, because I know Westminster very well, having been a councillor here for 15, 16 years. But it's very different when you are an MP. So I've been having a weekly call with around about 20 representatives of resident associations and amenity societies across the constituency, and again getting the feel from them what concerns them, what they want to see policy wise to improve lives for them and their neighbours.
It sounds like it's a very time consuming but very worthwhile operation that you have going on. What do you think about, or what's your views on post-pandemic preparedness? Because we all know that this is going to be around for a while, and that's just a fact of life. We have to get over it. But a lot of things have changed and will never go back to the way they were. For example, I can't imagine the parliament, your chamber, being Zoom oriented for the rest of its existence. That's probably not going to work. And it may work in a way now, but you need that contact. You need that person to person. What do you feel about what people should be doing now to prepare for when this is finished in 18 months, 2 years' time?
Well, I think you're right. I think we will see a huge change, and I hope a lot that will be positive. I think we've all enjoyed, particularly us in central London who've stayed here throughout the lockdown, of less traffic on the streets and the improvement of air quality. And we saw that quite quickly, actually. So I'm hoping that we will see more cycling and more walking, but that has to be properly managed. I've got no problem with cycle lanes, but there's no point having extra cycle lanes if they, clog up the traffic, because we're still going to have some sort of vehicles on the roads, whether it's deliveries, taxis, that type of vehicle. So there's no point just keeping them restricted, because they'll be idling on the streets, and the air quality will, the improvements we've seen will drastically diminish very quickly.
Yeah.
I think more and more people have realised, and more businesses have realised, that they can work from home. People can work from home very well, and I think a lot of people from a work-life balance, and many people, there's about 600,000 who come into Westminster, and probably the same number coming into the City of London every day. So over 1 million people coming into my constituency every day to work, and most come from outside zone 1 and 2, and people will be concerned about commuting because of the public health issues on trains and tubes. So I think we'll see more people working from home. That means businesses will need less space. That means that maybe we'll see less offices needed, and maybe that become more homes, because we have got a huge issue about affordable homes in London. So again, I think we're going to see a shift, and I hope that the community spirit we've seen across the country, but particularly I've seen it in my own neighbourhood, of people coming together, getting to know neighbours they may have lived next door to for years and have hardly spoken to them. I have been absolutely overwhelmed by the huge number of people who have volunteered. Westminster Council has Westminster Connects, which is a voluntary service. I signed up myself, and I've been working every Sunday morning preparing food for rough sleepers who are currently in hotels. And I've loved doing that because I've met some brilliant people. I've met people from my local area who I've never, would have never had a chance to meet before. So I think there's going to be some positives out of it. Obviously, there's going to be negatives. We're going to see a huge slump in the economy. News this week that the economy contracted by 20% in April alone. That's real people's jobs. We're going to see a huge number of redundancies coming over the next 3 to 4 months. But hopefully that is just a pause. I think somebody said to me this week, our economy is basically in intensive care.
Yep.
But we just need to be able to look after it and get it back on its feet. Yes. It's not like 2010. No. 2010 was very different.
Yeah.
This is a pause.
Yeah.
Rather than a stop.
I agree, but I also think there is another opportunity here. You were talking about the reduction in office space, and I would say that quite a few buildings are designed purely for offices and may not be in a position to convert into affordable housing. So there's going to be space, and I think that if the companies who rent those offices out were sensible, we may get a lot more businesses coming into London to take up that space because they can now afford it, and that there will be more commerce, more industry, more administration, more office work in the capital because the space is now available. And the developers are not in a position to keep them empty. They have to do something with them. So maybe that would be another opportunity for London to increase its administrative or its office space for more companies.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I think it's part of our evolution, to be honest.
Yes. Let's go on to the riots that we've been reading about. We get all of the news here, but you tend to get out of the habit of turning the news, the BBC on in the mornings and picking up the paper. Can you tell us a bit more what's happening in your constituency? Because I should imagine that you're probably a region with more statues than anywhere else in England.
I think my constituency's got more statues and more blue plaques than any other constituency in the country. Yep. And we saw last weekend that Westminster in particularly, but not just in Westminster, but in Bristol and in other places, Manchester, huge protests, huge demonstrations about Black Lives Matters, which was triggered by the killing of George Floyd in the US. There's more plans apparently this weekend for further protests. I think people are concerned about the social distancing, which I can really understand, but that does not detract from the message. And I think we've got to the stage now where we've probably played too much lip service to the whole cause over the last 10 years, and that we haven't really moved on. There's still not enough people from BAME backgrounds in senior positions. I think when I was at Westminster Council, when I led Westminster Council, I was very conscious of that. And the chief executive and I started a programme where we looked at not just the gender pay gap, but the BAME or the ethnic minority pay gap. And it was appalling. The women pay gap was bad enough, but the BAME was hang your head in shame levels. And there were very, very few officers of Black or Asian or ethnic minority backgrounds in even middle management. And so we said, and I spoke to the Black staff or the BAME staff group and said, no, enough is enough. We've got to change this, but it doesn't change overnight.
No.
And so we put in systems so that we could start to change that. But I think it's about mindset. I think it's about, I always say actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
And I think our country has always been multicultural, but there's certainly a disconnect between the ability for people from BAME backgrounds to get to into positions of seniority, and we've got to change that. But it starts with government. It starts with us doing our own work, making sure that we've got our own policies in place, that we've got our own programs in place, and that we encourage businesses to do that as well. We've started it with women, and I think we've seen great strides, particularly my generation, the generation below me. For example, in Parliament, we've got more women MPs than ever before. That's a good thing. I would say we certainly haven't got enough MPs of BAME background, particularly in my party. It's starting, but we've really got to strive on this.
Yes, indeed, and I think it's not just there; it's universal, and there's always going to be those issues, and here in the Middle East as well. I mean, we've still got those issues of us and them, and that's going to take a long time. Nickie, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure. And good luck in all of the things that you can do. And if we can help in any way, just let us know.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. And may I wish everybody at the English Business Council all the very best.
Thank you so much.